Hi everybody, this is Earl White with House Heroes. Thank you for checking out our blog about selling your house as is in Florida. I'm going to cover a few things in this video. First, what does selling as is mean? Two, whether you should sell as is or whether you should consider making repairs if they're requested by the buyer. And lastly, what are the disclosure laws in Florida? Because if you're selling as is, there might need to be repairs, and the question is whether or not you need to disclose those to the buyers to make sure you're protected. So first, selling as is, the meaning is pretty simple. Just means that you're not going to make or pay for any repairs prior to closing. It doesn't mean that the buyer can't inspect or that the buyer is not allowed inside the property. It doesn't mean that. It just means that you're not going to make any renovations. Sometimes people get surprised when the buyer comes in and they do an inspection with a property inspector, but that's actually perfectly normal on as-is deals. So again, as-is just means that you're not going to make repairs or pay for repairs prior to closing. Second, should you sell as is or should you be open to making repairs that a buyer might request? I think it depends how fast you want to close. If you just want to close as soon as possible, then you probably just want to sell as is and not get involved in a buyer requesting that you make repairs. So if you're looking for the fastest sale you can, selling as is usually the way to go, because you don't want to get involved in making a bunch of repairs. The other advantage of selling as is it's just faster, because you're not going to have to waste months trying to renovate a house. And it really can take months, because if you have a buyer lined up and they're applying for a mortgage and the bank finds a problem with the house and they don't want to approve the mortgage, then you could be starting from scratch. Most likely, if you're selling it as is, most likely you're probably going to go with a cash buyer, so you're not going to have to worry about waiting for approval of a mortgage for a month and then having to fix electrical, fix roof, fix plumbing issues for another 2 to 4 weeks, and then finally get to close a month later. So sell as is, it's going to be a lot faster. Downside of selling as is that you might be restricted to a cash buyer, and if you're restricted to only a cash buyer, you're probably going to have to take a cut on what you're going to sell for, because most retail properties on the MLS that sell for the maximum price, those are usually financed by a bank. So if you're going to sell as is, you should expect to take a pay cut. And also, if you're going to consider making repairs, it's worth it to consider how legitimate the buyer's request is. A lot of buyers' requests are very legitimate. Like, they'll do an inspection and they'll find something that might be significant, and maybe then you should consider repairing it, because even if you don't, you cancel on the buyer because you think that you don't want to make any repairs that they're requesting, the next buyer might bring up the same thing. So in some cases, you may want to consider, if the buyer asks, you may want to consider putting in some work, just because it might be an issue that comes up over and over again. In terms of what's your disclosure requirements in Florida, basically the way it works is that if something is not readily observable and you're aware of it, then it materially impacts the value of the property, you are supposed to disclose it under the Florida law. And basically what this means is, if there's something hidden, it could be like you painted on a ceiling to cover a water leak, or it's like mold in the wall. If there's something hidden that and the buyer just when they're walking through the property, there's no way they can see it, that's when you do have the obligation to disclose. You don't have to go disclose everything that a buyer obviously can see. So that's it. If it's hidden and it does impact the value, and the buyer's going to be unable to see it when they're walking through the property with an inspector, then you're supposed to disclose that. And Florida does have a common disclosure form, a seller disclosure form. If you want to use that, you can go look it up online, find the seller disclosure form, and fill it in with everything about the property. And some people like to do that. Other people, they're not interested in that. They just want to get done with the sale as soon as possible, and they might not want to use the form. But in any case, here the bottom line is, when you're selling as is, your disclosure requirement is, if it can't be seen by the buyer, and you're aware of it, and it's going to impact the value of the property notably, then you're supposed to disclose it. Okay, guys, that's really the basics of selling as is. And I hope you like this video. I hope it was helpful. Thank you.